everyone. Thank you for coming. I, Alexander Hamilton, am pleased to announce the commencement of our 17th annual dinner party from hell. Each year, we get together to debate a different topic. Today's discussion will be regarding the extent to which freedom and democracy have been present in America and since its origins back to when I was alive, since I have been dead for so long. And I have many important things to attend to. I accidentally forget most of your names and why you're considered relevant enough to be here. So if you could all go around and, say what you did and talk a little bit about what you did during your lives, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Thaddeus Stevens, and I lived between 1792 and 1868. I was born into poverty in Vermont, but moved to Pennsylvania at a young age. It was there that I became a successful lawyer and rose in the political ranks, serving in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. I was a member, thank you, Peggy, of the anti-Masonic Party, the Whig Party, and the Republican Party. Abolition was very important to me, and so, after the Civil War, I joined a faction of my party against President Andrew Johnson's lenient treatment of Southern Reconstruction. I believed that freedom and democracy should not apply only to white men, but to all men. I played a large role in the House of Representatives' impeachment of Andrew Johnson, and for that, I am proud. As a politician, I was also a supporter of public schools, banks, and tariff increases.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Katie Stanton, and I was alive between 1815 and 1902. I was born into a large New York family, and my parents believed that I should be educated, so I learned a lot when I was younger. Then I got married to a leading abolitionist and began helping him with his political work. Eventually, I became sick of my domestic role and decided to organize a women's rights convention in Seneca Falls with the help of my good friend Lucas Chamat. I helped organize a movement for women's suffrage in the late 1840s and would have lasting impacts on future suffragettes. I supported abolition and freedom and democracy for all African Americans. I was unsupportive for the 14th and 15th Amendment because of their failure to extend to women's rights.
And I believe that's my cue, Katie.
Don't call me that.
Whatever. I'm Frederick Douglass, and I was alive between 1818 and 1895. I was born into slavery in Maryland and escaped at the age of 20. I soon began traveling in the North in support of abolition, and I published numerous books on the topic, propelling me to national prominence. I was in favor of the Civil War for moral reasons, and while I was comforted by the constitutional amendments following the North's victory, I was saddened by the lack of real social change. The blacks were certainly not represented democratically, especially after the South, and I sought to change this unsuccessfully.
Hey, I'm Peggy Eaton, and I was alive between 1799 and 1879. In 1829, my second husband, John Eaton, was appointed Secretary of War by Andrew Jackson, but my poor reputation as a tavern maid angered the other cabinet ladies, forcing my husband and Martin Van Buren to resign, so Jackson could overhaul his cabinet completely. This would come to be known as the Petticoat Affair.
Okay, but what exactly did you do, Miss Eaton? In fact, I seemingly recall that someone who knew you in life said that you were irresistible and carry whatever point you set your mind on.
I brought the pizza.
Aw. Well, in that case, Miss Eaton, I look forward to seeing you next year.
Call me Peggy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Henry Cabot Lodge, and I lived from 1850 to 1924. During my life, I was both a historian and a politician. I served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives before moving to Washington to serve in the United States Senate. I eventually worked my way up to becoming the Senate Majority Leader as a member of the Republican Party from 1920 until my death 4 years later. I played an enormous role in the defeat of the post-World War I Treaty of Versailles as the chief opponent of President Woodrow Wilson. I did not appreciate the lack of sovereignty that would accompany the so-called League of Nations, and so I did everything in my power to prevent America from becoming a part of that heinous organization. Ultimately, I was successful.
Well, I guess we should get started with the discussion. Being one of the founding fathers, I certainly have a great deal to say on the topic of freedom and democracy. Me and the other men of my time believe that a democratic government was the only way to go. However, we disagreed on the degree of freedom and democracy. Being a member of the early Federalist Party, I was extremely concerned about a mob rule and believed that the French Revolution was a terrible mistake. Yet, it is important for everyone to be free. I have always been against slavery. However, politics should be kept in the hands of the wealthy. This is not because they are the most rich, but because, in general, they're the most educated. Obviously, there are exceptions, and poor people who are educated should certainly be allowed to voice their political opinion. However, the uneducated masses cannot be trusted with the keys of democracy. It is quite simply very foolish. Real liberty is neither found in despotism or the extremes of democracy, but in moderate governments. Freedom for all, but democracy for few. That's how I see it. I'm sorry, but I can't help but point out the hypocrisy in your words. You state that there should be freedom for everyone, but democracy for the wealthy. While I can't disagree with your assessment of democracy, freedom for all is not at all what it has been perpetuated throughout American history, especially in your time period, Mr. Hamilton. With women practically being the property of men with few rights for themselves, how can you even justify your own actions in support of the government that denied women the most basic right? It just seems unfathomable.
Now, Katie.
You're not funny. Protest.
While you protest that women are practically the property of men with few rights, the slave was quite literal property with absolutely no rights. And, Mr. Hamilton, while I appreciate your progressive outlook on slavery, your belief that freedom would eventually be extended to all was extremely nearsighted. I cannot fathom how you justified ignoring the freedom of African Americans and saving it for a later date. Well, this later date has yet to come, and I am doubtful that it will ever come. If slavery had been ended upon America's founding, it would never have grown into the institution that it was, and my freedom would never have been denied.
With all due respect, Mr. Douglas, we don't have much time, and I have heard you accuse Hamilton of expanding slavery annually for the past 16 years. Perhaps we could instead discuss whether Mr. Hamilton allowed for the future expansion of democracy, and I believe that history shows he did not.
Of course, Mr. Hamilton was not an advocate of true democracy. In the early times of America, the only people who had real rights were those who were privileged. Think about it. The only people who were able to vote, the ideals that America was founded on, was literally only white men. No women, no African Americans, just whites who were men. And Mr. Hamilton, you have the audacity to say that you allowed for future perpetuation of democracy. If that were true, you would have given rights to everyone. The irony lies in the Declaration of Independence with the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal." Thomas Jefferson had slaves. How is that equal?
Well, Katie, you might actually have a point. I've really been thinking about it. When Mr. Hamilton and the other founding fathers were trying to form this country, they did not account for democracy. If they had, maybe we wouldn't have had all the problems that America has faced. However, if these problems have ultimately allowed America to become even more democratic and even more free. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. I mean, come on guys, look around. Each of us have drastically fought for or against democracy. Well, except for you, Peggy. We still have no idea why you're here.
Well, actually, it all began. Well, look what we have here. Sorry I'm late to this meeting. Would anyone like to fill me in?
Well, 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 McCarthy. Nice of you to show up. Now let's see. Would you mind reminding us what you did when you were alive and how you impacted American history? No offense, but I've been dead for so long, and I've developed a great memory loss. You were a communist, right? I was not a communist! So you were a socialist.
How dare you?
My God, I didn't realize anarchists and socialists were so different.
For heaven's sake, I was not on the left side of the political spectrum.
Ah, so you were a fascist.
I guess, kind of. I was a U.S. Senator from Wisconsin who served in Congress in the 1950s. I became famous when I pretended that I knew the names of a bunch of commies in the State Department, and the American people went ballistic. Eventually, they figured out I was lying, and I drank myself to death after my descent into disgrace at the age of 48.
Well, who can blame you? You were really only trying to help protect the American public. If it means being a little harsh, so what?
If I may interject, isn't the whole point of America that people are allowed to be free to be who they are without fear that they would be hunted down or forced to be changed?
Katie, come on. You know as well as I do that sometimes you have to take some extraordinary measures in order to be successful. Anyone remember when the First World War ended and everyone was freaking out about what to do? Stupid Wilson tried creating the League of Nations, a committee that would literally force America to get involved with countries. I mean, I had to do something for the American people. The only way to protect them was to go against Wilson and provide logic when no one else had it. The United States is the world's best hope, but if you fetter her in the interests and quarrels of other nations, if you tangle her in the intrigue of Europe, you will destroy her power for good and endanger her very existence. I understand that the early founding fathers fought for the ideals of democracy and all that, but they also fought for isolationism. Washington specifically said in his farewell address that we must avoid interfering with other countries. The real question to ask ourselves, gentlemen, and Katie, and Peggy, how important is democracy to America when facing other problems? Sure, the League of Nations was ideally more democratic than my plan, but we had to avoid problems that would surely arise otherwise, right? Right?
Exactly.
Oh, great.
Since our main topic is basically about me and...
Actually, Alexander, it's not...
Yeah, about me. I got it. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that I wasn't actually a huge fan of democratic lifestyle at first. My longtime enemy, Thomas Jefferson, was much more into ideas about a loose government and had a different interpretation of what democracy meant. All he wanted to do was live on a farm and have state governments and not have any authority whatsoever. But that didn't work. He loved the Articles of Confederation, arguably the worst thing to ever happen to the United States of America. However, it was also the epitome of democracy. But it failed. Really makes everyone wonder if true democracy was ever that important to Americans. After all, if it wasn't for me writing 51 pages, yes, you heard that correctly, I literally wrote 51 pages because I am just that amazing, and there's literally nothing I can't do, and... Wait, what was I saying again?
Something about writing 51 pages?
Oh yeah, that was awesome. It was 51 pages of the Federalist Papers, which was essentially an argument about the Constitution. Something that fought for a strict government rather than Jefferson's belief of a small government.
Typical Hamilton tooting his own horn. The Articles of Confederation is simply one example of the failure of democracy, and that was because of the lack of leadership. Democracy must be extended to all people in a nation, and, in successful cases, it is the duty of democratic governments to try and extend these ideas to the rest of the world as well. How convenient, Stevens, considering the anti-democratic measures you took when trying to take power away from the executive branch. Also, the treatment you advocated for the South during the Reconstruction era was extremely anti-democratic. In fact, looking around this room, in none of our eras was America a true democracy. I was merely contributing to American democracy with my actions. Strip the proud nobility of their bloated estates, reduce them to a level with plain Republicans, send forth to labor, and teach their children to enter the workshops or handle the plow, and you will thus humble proud traitors.
I hate to say it, but Mr. Lodge makes an excellent point. Back in Hamilton's day, the founding fathers swore they were protecting democracy for everybody, but throughout American history, there have always been a group of people who were treated worse. Whether it was women, African Americans, the Southerners during the Reconstruction, foreigners, or those who were falsely accused, American history proves that America is not as democratic as it makes itself out to be. What?
Wow, Peggy, I am officially amazed. Thank you so much for coming to this dinner party. I definitely feel as though freedom and democracy are some of the most important topics in our nation's history, and as Miss Eaton so accurately illuminated, have been constantly denied. In the future, we can only hope that politicians will recognize the idealistic claims behind our country's origins and strive to rectify the mistakes made by past citizens. Until next year.